Okay, it's time we can start, guys. So, firstly, good morning. I'm hoping everybody is having a good weekend. I know it's a Sunday, it's a morning class. Nonetheless, I just wanted to finish the chapter today. Yeah, because as discussed earlier in the previous classes, we'll be having a quiz on Tuesday based on this chapter. So I wanted to finish it early on, like even though it's a Sunday, and that's why we're having a class today in the morning. Anyways, so that's that. And just to give you like heads up as to what's going to happen in today's class, like the structure of the class, it's going to be the last part on discussing chapter 6, which is titled as the three orders, right? We'll be majorly talking about the 14th century now. So like we are moving a couple of centuries ahead. So yeah, that's the structure. But cool. A couple of you are already here, so good morning all of you. Okay, I'm hoping other people will join as well in the next couple of minutes, but in the meanwhile I'll do the introductory part. Anyways, so my name is Nikitha and I'm the history educator here at Unacademy Scholars channel. I take classes for both standard 11th and 12th. And regarding my educational qualifications, I have recently graduated from Ashoka University with a bachelor's degree, and my major subject is history and a minor in political science. So that's my educational qualification. And just quickly moving on to a couple of Unacademy's plus and iconic features and their pricing. So firstly, starting off with Unacademy plus features, you can sit at your own houses and listen to some of the live classes taught by top educators of India, and you have unlimited access to all of these courses. There are regular doubt clearing sessions, answer writing sessions. Along with that, there's also exhaustive coverage of syllabus, and added to that there are practice tests and live test series as well. There's mentorship and guidance provided to you, along with access to study materials which are usually in the form of PDF, so you can basically access them during the times of exams. It'll act as some kind of revision which makes your job much easier. And quickly coming to pricing for Unacademy Plus, there are 6 variations in pricing, like 6 ranges. Firstly, it's a 3-month subscription. Then there's 9, then there's 12, 15, 18 and 24. The prices for each of them are clearly listed beside the duration. So have a look at them and go ahead with whichever one you feel comfortable. Moving on to iconic, here the features are even better and greater than plus, in the sense that there's personal mentorship provided. There are live doubt solving sessions. That's another provision. There are weekly reports. There is a direct parent connect, along with study planners also being provided. So these are a couple of extra benefits. And the pricing for iconic subscription goes as follows. The durations are the same, just like plus. The same 6 durations, 3, 9, 12, 15, 18 and 24 months. But pricing might hike a little bit because the features are special here, right? So again, they're clearly up on the screen, like the total package is here, the monthly thing is here. So have a look at them and go ahead with whichever one you want to. And lastly, before going into the content for today, there is some kind of Unacademy's combat scholarship test happening. As the name suggests, it's a scholarship test, and this is basically for 9th and 11th standard students, which means it's applicable to you. So you can win scholarships worth 1 crore rupees, and the format of the exam is as such that you will be given 60 minutes to answer 30 questions. And these tests are available both in Hindi and English. And alongside, these are free live tests on Android app and web. And today, it is 24th of October. The test will be happening at 1 p.m. So quickly go enroll yourselves as soon as the live class is over. Yeah, the link for that is in the description below of this video. So please go check that out. And lastly, there's some other special feature called Bugs Bounty introduced by Unacademy. So it's an opportunity for all you learners out there to report any inappropriate content in the video. You can be the first one to report a particular issue and claim your prize. And you can also report any inappropriate content using the form in the description below of this video again. So the power is in your hands. Cool. So that's a little bit pitch we had for today. Okay, a couple of y'all joined. Ayushi is here. Hi Ayushi, good morning. Cool. I'm hoping everybody is having a good weekend. So on that high note, I will start off the chapter. Yeah. Anyway, so today is the last class for chapter 5. I'm pretty sure it's not going to be monotonous. It's a lot informative today because we'll be dealing about several aspects like political, social and economic changes that were happening post the 13th century in Europe because of several factors, because of several reasons, right? So we'll discuss what those reasons are. It's a pretty straightforward class, so like not much concepts involved, so it's going to be easier, right? Cool. Okay, so the first sub-theme for today's class is the crisis of the 14th century, right? So till yesterday, whatever we've discussed regarding this chapter, we've only seen like the positive elements of it, right? Like it's the economy is booming, the society is growing, the political structure is developing, like everything positive, right? Till the 13th century. But as the 14th century started kicking in, there are a lot of problems that Europe faces, like European people face. Yeah, they're everything, like all this crisis is coming from all the sides, like natural factors, economic factors, political factors, like man-made factors. Yeah, several different categories of them, and we'll be discussing each one of them in detail in today's class. Yes. So cool, we'll start off with the economic one first. Yeah. So by the early 14th century, right, which means 1310s, 1320s, in the medieval part of Europe, whatever the economy that was booming prior to the 14th century, that particular expansion slowed down, right? So which basically means that trade was decreasing, or the value of currency started falling down, you know, like certain other economic economic repressions. So why is that happening, right? Like there has to be a reason, and there are three particular factors which can be attributed to this economic expansion being slowed down. Yeah, so we look at what those three factors are. So the first one is the weather, right? Like the climate of the Europe. So as we've discussed earlier, again, like going back to a little bit of history, in the 4th, 5th centuries, when especially the Roman people were there, the weather was utterly cold, like bitterly cold, right? It was too freezing, like the soil was frozen and all that stuff. But from the 10th to 13th century, it has become a little bit warmer. Yeah, the soil is not frozen anymore. You could cultivate and, you know, like produce agriculture and all that stuff. But once again, the situation is reversed here, right? In the 14th century, or like by the end of 13th century, all of these warm climates, warm summers, they started disappearing all of a sudden. Yeah, again the same old bitter cold started coming in. So because of that, obviously you can't grow crops all around the year because the soil is frozen most of the time, and it's obviously becomes difficult to grow crops. Alongside that, the places on the higher altitudes, yeah, like on the hill stations and all, they are like even colder, right? The atmosphere in the hill stations is even colder than that of the plains. So on the hills though, agriculture is like not even an option, right? It's much harder there. And this is one environmental factor, which is the change in climate. The second is there's so much of flooding happening, right? So much of excess water, it started flowing down into the villages, into the settlements, into the farmlands, right? So obviously because of that the crop is destroyed and therefore no agricultural productivity. If there is no agricultural productivity, there is no income to the farmers, right? If there is no income to the farmers, how will they pay the taxes? Yeah, so it's a chain cycle, right? Floods destroying the agricultural crops, therefore no income to the peasants, and therefore they can't pay tax to the state. Yeah, so the revenue for the governments or the revenue for the states is no more there, or in fact we can say it has decreased, right? So that is another natural factor. So like all these forest lands, all these pastoral lands where animals used to graze for grass and all that stuff, they were also becoming much difficult because of the cold climates again. Yeah, and so those are a couple of factors. Added to that, the even worse part is we've studied about the 3-field rotation of crops in the yesterday's class, right? So I'm hoping again everybody remembers the concept of 3-field rotation of crops. So it's effective to a certain extent, right? But after a couple of centuries it's not effective anymore because the nutrients from the soil are being heavily exhausted by the crops. Yeah, because of instead of 2 crops, now 3 crops are being grown, which means more nutrients are needed, which means soil is not nutritious anymore because all of its nutrients are going to the crops, right? So because of that, because of intensive plowing and all, the soil also started becoming less nutritious, and this is because of the 3 rotation of crops, and soil conservation was also not proper, right? You need to add specific manure, pesticides and all that effective strategies to improve the nutrients of the soil, but that kind of soil conservation was never seen in the medieval section of the Europe, right? So that's like one part of the crisis. We still have a lot to talk about. It's just the beginning, right? Even now also it sounds horrible because nothing is going right. Environment is not proper, like man-made factors are not proper, there are floods, there is climatic problems, no soil, no nutrients in the soil, like everything is a problem, right? Apart from these there are also other problems. We'll discuss them in the next slide. Yeah, okay. In case of any questions, just put them down in the chat box, guys. I'll reply to them ASAP. Okay, so now we've discussed that pasture lands are also not available. Pasture lands are basically the places where the cattle or the animals go and find grass. Like pasture lands are nothing but grass, right? So animals go there and eat that grass. That's their source of food. So because there are no pasture lands anymore, because of the harsh climatic conditions, it meant that cattle doesn't have proper food. And eventually, if anybody doesn't have proper food, they will die, right? So that is exactly the thing that was happening, and there was a reduction in the number of cattle in the end of the by the end of the 13th century, right? So, and we've also seen that in previous classes that population was booming. Yeah, population almost like doubled in 5-6 centuries, which means that there are a lot of people living. But because of all this crisis, the resources are becoming lesser and lesser, right? So anywhere in the world at any point of time, if there is a lot of population, yeah, the population is higher, but the resources are not much, resources are lower, right? That kind of situation leads to a famine, right? Famine, again, you all know what famine is. It's a natural condition, like where you don't have proper food to eat, like lack of resources basically. People die out of hunger. Yeah, they starve for food. So that's famine, and that is exactly what's happening in the 13th, 14th century Europe, because population was there but resources was not there. Yeah. It's not just one famine, right? There are a series of famines that hit Europe. Yeah, especially between 1315 and 1317. Yeah, it almost extended for 2 years, and after that also it didn't end. even in 1320s, there are so many massive cattle deaths. Yeah, so famine is not just about the humans dying, but it is also about the other living creatures dying. Yeah, so that's been there in the 1310s and 1320s. Okay, so that's about the famine part. Nextly, coming to another economic aspect of the economic life, which is the currency, right? Barter system was no more there. As we've discussed, there's a lot of transactions happening in the society, everything is driven by money, right? Like physical money, currency. But in the 13th century again, yeah, there is some sort of crisis happening in relation to the currency as well, because in order for you to make coins, right, back in those times notes weren't there, only coins existed, right? And that too not coins made of like random materials, but in many cases gold or silver or copper, like precious metals were used to mint coins, right? But there was lack of silver mines in Austria and Serbia. Like initially, Austria and Serbia were supposed to be rich in terms of silver mines, right? From these two places itself, so much of silver used to be exported to other parts of Europe. But from the 13th century, there's no silver left in the mines in Austria and Serbia. And that is why we don't have enough silver to mint coins, right? There's a shortfall in the output of silver. Yeah. So what will the governments do now? There's no silver. How will they mint coins? Right? The alternate solution for this is, instead of making coins with 100% silver, probably they have reduced the silver content in the coin. Yeah, but probably, let's say a coin is there, and if you break it down into different elements, let's say like roughly 40-50% is silver, and the rest of the metal used was some cheap metal like tin or lead or copper. Yeah, silver is basically diluted and it is mixed with certain other metals, and that is called that is what is happening in the 13th century Europe because of the lack of silver mines. Yeah, so the textbook says the worst is yet to come. Like, this is not the worst part. Like, by now everybody must have felt that, oh my god, like so much bad stuff is happening to Europe, but this is not even like the worst part yet. The worst is yet to come, right? So what is that? So that is basically some kind of disease, yeah, some kind of plague infection. So we'll look at what that is in detail. So but like, firstly, how is this plague or contagious disease come into Europe in the first place, right? So this plague infection was not a part of Europe initially. Yeah, it was happening in the Americas or like some other West Asian parts, but because of the trade that is happening, yeah, in the ships, in the cargo, whenever all these exports and imports used to come to the European ports, along with the cargo, along with the material, rats used to come, right? Like rats, mouse, mice, yeah. So animal rats in abundant quantities, in like large numbers, they used to travel in these ships, and they used to enter the ports of European coastline, right? And from there it entered the interior parts of the Europe land, right? So now what happens, right? The ships came in, the rats also entered. Because of the rats containing certain kind of infections within them, yeah, they are responsible for spreading this plague infection, which in those times is called as the Black Death, right? The spelling is here, it's Black Death. Yeah, it's a deadly bubonic plague infection, right? It's very, very dangerous. It's highly contagious. Like, let's say two people are there in a room, and let's say I have that plague. Within no time, the other person will also catch that plague. It's that random, it's that quickly contagious, right? Almost like corona, let's say. Yeah, so like I'm just giving you a reference as to how contagious that is. Yeah, so that's happening. And especially the western part of Europe has hit really hard because of this epidemic. Yeah, so this plague is referred to as an epidemic, especially between 1347 and 1350, right? So like there was utter like absolute chaos in these 3 years in the western part of Europe. Yeah, so like so many deaths and all were happening, right? And according to a rough estimate by the scholars, it is noted that almost 20% of the whole population of Europe died in these 3 years because of the plague. That is a lot, right? Like 20% of the population being totally wiped out entirely by a random disease. That much didn't happen even for corona, right? For corona itself, like people are dying in huge numbers, but we've never reached like 20% of the population being wiped out. The hard we hit was like 2% in India, right? So now imagine the intensity of the deaths, right? 20% of the whole population being wiped out, and the worst case scenario is in some places even 40% of the population was wiped out, right? So basically deadly times, like very difficult times. Yeah, it was very hard to survive because it's super contagious. Yeah. Okay, any questions till here? Aditya, no, it's not a type of punishment. That's exactly the point I mentioned right now. It is a type of plague, right? Like plague is nothing but a infectious disease which spreads from one person to another. That plague, like every plague has a name, right? So this particular plague which happened in Western Europe, it's called as Black Death, right? It's not punishment, but it's the name of the plague because of which people used to die. Yeah, I'm hoping that is clear, Aditya. Okay, any other questions? Okay, no questions, then I can go ahead. Cool, so we were talking about the okay, Aditya got this. Cool. 20% of the population being wiped out, in worst case scenarios even 40%. Yeah, so these are like majorly trade centers, right? Like which are whatever like important trade centers were there in the European region, those cities were the hardest hit because all of these rats entered via the trade centers, right? They were the main centers where all of these uh, plague was spreading to a certain extent, right? So especially in like closed spaces, for example monasteries and convents. Yeah, the same point I was mentioning, right? Like let's say I'm in a room, I'm in a closed environment, my surrounding person, like anybody surrounding me would obviously get the plague within no time. Yeah, so that's what is happening in the monasteries and convents as well, because they're closed spaces. People usually don't move from one place to another. They are all settled in one region, like in one room. That because of that the plague started spreading very quickly. Yeah, and almost like everyone used to die, whoever used to get it. Yeah, because even if a person is like extremely immune, even if he's extremely healthy, he will not have that potential within him to fight the plague. That's how dangerous it is. Yes. So yeah, so almost in that case like none survived, whoever has been affected. And especially like in the demographic, like if you look at the demographics as well, the worst toll was among the infants, right? Like obviously like children don't have much immunity, they will easily die, right? So the worst toll was among the infants, followed by the young people, and then elderly people used to die, right? So these are like levels of resistance within one's body. Yeah, so this 1347 to 1350 plague was like a huge one, but after 1350 this doesn't mean the plague is over. But in the 1360s and 70s as well, there was other kinds of plague. Yeah, but these are minor episodes, right? Like these many people didn't die, but people did die to a certain extent, right? So it's like a chain reaction or like a continuous process which was happening throughout the 60s and 70s. And now, to give you like a rough estimate as to what the population of Europe was after the epidemic hit them, yeah, you'll be surprised by the numbers, yeah. It, it was almost like 73 million in 1300 AD, right? Within a century, it has dropped down to almost 45 million. That's like 1/3 of the population is totally wiped out. Yeah, so that's huge. So just by looking at the rough estimates of these figures, you should get an idea as to how deadly the epidemic was. Okay, any questions till here, guys? Okay, I don't see any questions, therefore I'll move forward. Cool. So what did we talk about till now, right? Like we've talked about the environmental factors, right? The weather conditions, like whatever the plague was happening and all that stuff, combined with the economic crisis, yeah, the currency part and like trade not flourishing and all that stuff. So all of these factors together combined and they resulted in immense social dislocation. What is social dislocation? It is nothing but people moving out from these cities and towns, yeah, going somewhere else and settling down. They're basically vacating their houses, right? They're moving away from the city or like into the countryside or whatever. So these factors resulted in social dislocation, and because of that, yeah, there is some kind of depopulation happening. There are no people in the city, right? There are no people in the town residing anymore. All of them moved out. And that is why there is major shortage of labor. There are no people to work, right? For any activity to be carried out, you need man force, you need labor. But that labor itself now does not exist anymore because everybody moved out almost. Yeah. So even in the agricultural sector, manufacture sector, nothing was going right. Everything was an imbalance. Yeah. Nobody was there to engage in those activities. Basically, there's no productivity. Yeah. So obviously because of that, agricultural productivity has become much decreased, right? Agricultural productivity has decreased, and like even if the stock is there, even if the stocks of the grains are there, there are no people to buy the grains, right? So basically, what again, going back to the economic philosophy of demand and supply, yeah, the supply is there, yeah, but the demand is not there, and therefore what will happen? The prices will come down, the prices will fall down, right? So basic economic philosophy. There's so much of supply, but there's no demand, and automatically the prices will fall. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. There are no people to buy, but there's so much of agricultural production, and therefore the prices fell down, right? So like whatever like little labor was available, because they are less in number, right? So here the supply is less, the supply of laborers is less, but the demand for labor is more, right? Then what will happen? The price will increase, right? So it's a reverse economic philosophy. So now what's happening is, because of no laborers, yeah, but there is so much demand for labor. So now what happens? Laborers started demanding extra salaries or like extra wages, right? Basically, wage rates went up. So, like, especially in the England part, right? Like, as much as 250% growth can be seen in the wage rates. Yeah, let's say I'm working as a laborer and my salary before the Black Death, like before that epidemic, let's say I'm minus 100 rupees, right? I started demanding 250 rupees for the same amount of work after the Black Death because there's nobody else willing to work. But I am willing to work. But if I should work, you're supposed to pay me 250. Right? So that kind of demand was there in the hands of the laborers, in the hands of the peasants. Right? So they could like demand twice their earlier wages right now. So that kind of stuff has been happening. Okay, so that's about this disruption or like the economic crisis of the 14th century Europe. Now, if there are any questions, because we are done with like one sub theme, just ask them. If there are none, then we can move on to the next subtopic, which is social unrest. Right? So just let me know in the chat box if there are any questions. Okay, Aditya has a question. Ma'am, was the prices of agricultural food was high? That's why there were few people to buy it. No, it's actually the reverse situation, Aditya. First, what happened is people were not there, right? It's exactly the reverse of what you're telling. People were not there because people moved out of those regions because of the epidemic, right? Because people were not there, agricultural prices also like stumbled, right? So it's exactly the reverse situation of what you told, like the basically order of things that were happening, right? First people moved out and then the prices stumbled, right? Okay, any more questions? Cool, then we can continue, I guess. Okay, I'll quickly move ahead and talk about the social unrest part. So here, because of these economic changes, because of these environmental changes, the society is also disturbed, right? And therefore the term social unrest. So what's happening within the society, right? The income of the lords was obviously badly hit. Yeah. Now we'll see what is happening to the second order here. Who is the second order? The lords. What is happening to them? What kind of situation were they in? Were they still prospering in the times of the epidemic because of all these changes, or something bad is happening to them as well? Right? So we'll look at them in detail in this subtheme. So the answer is they were also like badly affected because of all this, right? And it declined as agricultural prices came down, right? There's like nobody is buying them in the market because there are no people to buy. And on the other side, the little amount of labor, like the little number of labor, whoever was willing to work, even they started demanding a lot of wages, yeah, from the lords. Obviously, like all of the money is going out from his pocket, so that is not a good sign for the lord. He's basically disappointed. He doesn't want that to happen, but he can't control the scenario, right? So in desperation, what he did was he tried to give up the money contracts that he had entered into earlier, right? Like before this epidemic hit in, and before all these changes, whatever money contracts were there, he tried to somehow manipulate all these. And also like he tried to revive the labor services, right? He's like somehow like repressing the peasants or repressing the laborers into exploiting them and making them work freely and all that stuff. But nonetheless, peasants were strong enough this time. Like even lords could not do anything about the peasants, right? So now it's a total failure on part of the lords. like whenever he tried to, like disturb all these money contracts and labor services, obviously peasants did not agree to them. Yeah, they violently opposed. Like they not just opposed it like passive. We've come across this term called passive opposition, right? Like not just in passive terms now, but people have become, like peasants have become much active, and they started violently opposing the peasants. Like there's so much of bloodshed, like there's hitting, there's violence, like there's physical violence, right? So especially the better educated and the more prosperous peasants, they don't want the lord to act in such a manner, and that's why they violently opposed the lords. Yeah. So what are those kinds of, some kinds of or some examples of peasant rebellions that were happening? For example, in the year 1323 in Flanders is it's a city in present day Belgium, right? So in Belgium, peasants started revolting in 1323, and in the year 1358 French peasants revolted, and in the year 1381 English peasants also revolted against the lords, right? So like there's so much of violent means or violent methods, which means that there is social unrest. Okay, cool. So like whenever these rebellions were happening, like whenever peasants rose in revolt, that doesn't like mean they were successful, because lords still had the military under them, or lords still had that much of power to crush these rebellions, right? In fact, they were sometimes ruthless, right? So it is significant that they occurred with the most violent intensity in the areas which had experienced the prosperity of the economic expansion. So initially, whichever areas were experiencing this economic expansion in a more diverse manner, like which have been flourishing a lot because of economic expansion, those are the same areas where there are violent means adopted now, like now as in the 14th century, right? So peasants are like trying their best to safeguard their interests and to oppose the lords, which, like who are being ruthless, right? So that's happening, and despite the severe repression, right, like there's so much of force that is being applied onto the peasants by the lords to crush the revolt or to crush the rebellion, but the sheer intensity of peasant opposition, yeah, like that, like peasants right now, or like peasants in the 14th century, are no more quiet. They're very vocal, right? They started protesting, they started rebelling and all that stuff. The mere act of rebelling, even though it is successful or not, is a secondary thing, but the mere act in itself, it resulted in the destruction of the old feudal relations. Yeah, what does this mean? That the lord can't exploit the peasant anymore. There are no feudal relations between us. I'm not a fief, right? And you're not my lord. Therefore, I'm not going to work under you, right? These kinds of statements were made by the peasants, right? So, in some sense, it's a good thing for the peasants because they're trying to demolish that dangerous feudal relation. Yeah, but for the lords, it's not a good thing. Yeah, and the money economy was far too advanced to be reversed. Again, what does this mean? Initially, there were barter system, but now there's so much of currency, right? But because of silver, there are no minting of coins. Currency of value, like value of currency, started decreasing and all that stuff, as we've discussed in the previous slides. Now, the question is, could this be reversed? Like, can we go back to the barter system because there's no currency available, right? But the answer is no, because money transactions have been heavily happening with the use of currency, and you have gone much, much deeper into it that you can't come back, that you can't go back, right? So there's no going back. The reversal of the situation can't happen. Yeah. So therefore, though the lords succeeded in crushing the revolts, yeah, they were successful because they had their own army and power. They crushed the revolts, but the peasants ensured that the feudal privileges of the earlier days, which were there till the 13th century, the peasants ensured that they would not be reimposed. Yeah, peasants were already tired. They're like, we can't do this anymore. We can't allow somebody else to control our lives. Yeah, they're frustrated. Obviously, they have so much of anger within them and all. Now they burst it out. Right? So, okay. Any questions till here, guys? Okay, Ronak is here. Hi, Ronak. Sorry, man, I didn't see your message. I was just trying to explain. But like after every slide, I'll come back to the comment section, right? So don't worry about it. I'll definitely respond. Okay. So if any questions are there till here, just let me know. I'll answer them. Otherwise, we can move on to the next. Okay, that's about the social unrest. But now we'll quickly move on to the political changes, right? So we've talked about economic, we've talked about social. The last factor we have is political, right? So developments in the political sphere, obviously they were also, the political sphere was also changing alongside the social processes. But are these political changes happening in a negative limelight or a positive limelight, right? As far as the economic and social are concerned, everything is negative, right? But when it comes to political changes, there are some elements which are positive in nature, right? Some kind of positive political changes that were happening, and we'll have a look at what are those positive changes, right? So in the 15th and 16th centuries, now we are moving a century ahead, right? So we are coming to 15th and 16th now. So here, European kings, yeah, like whoever it is, France king, England king, Germany, Spain, whatever, they strengthened their military and financial power, right? So what is a significant feature here? Kings started having their own armies. Basically the gist of this is they're not relying on the lords or like the second order anymore for the supply of soldiers, right? Because initially we've seen that when it comes to the supply of soldiers, kings always relied on the lords. But now that is not the case anymore, because kings started maintaining their own military. They have their own standing armies under the direct disposition of the king, right? And he also had certain financial powers because all of the treasury was under the king. He was the sole responsible person. Yeah. So these kind of political changes were happening. And the powerful new states they created were a significant, as significant for Europe as the economic changes, right? So basically they're saying that all these states are powerful, they are very effective, like the kings have been carrying out their administration in a very efficient manner, right? So they're very significant. So historians, therefore, looking at the positive outlook of all these political changes, they decided, like scholars and historians, they decided to call these kings who were ruling in the 15th, 16th centuries in Europe as the new monarchs, right? Like quote unquote, the new monarchs. It's here. Yeah, they're called as the new monarchs by the historians. So like examples of who they were, right? Like in those times in 15th, 16th centuries, some of the important kings of Europe who are referred to as the new monarchs are number one, Louis XI in France, right? Louis XVI, Louis XIV, we know all of them, but Louis XI was ruling in France in 15th, 16th centuries. And then there's Maximilian in Austria, and then there's Henry VII in England, yeah, and Isabel and Ferdinand in Spain. All of these were important rulers in Europe, during that time, and all of these were absolutist rulers, right? They're very, very great, powerful rulers. And they started the process of organizing standing armies, just the point I made. All of the armies were under their control, not under the control of the Lord, right? And then they also had a permanent bureaucracy, right? Another institution of the state which is powerful. And then they had a national taxation system, which means that everybody in the kingdom should definitely pay a tax, and this is universal in nature. Right? There are no differences between taxpayers. Everybody has to pay the same tax. Right? And in Spain and Portugal, they began to play a role in Europe's expansion overseas. So like, why Spain and Portugal in particular here? Because we know that by 15th, 16th centuries, Portuguese people were already exploring the outside world. They're taking out on all of these voyages. They've discovered, like, Portuguese also entered in India in 1498, right? Vasco da Gama came to India in 1498. He is a Portuguese man. So like, they started to expand their boundaries even outside Europe, right? So that's the kind of influence that they were having on the society in general, right? Okay. So nextly, the most important reason for the triumph of these monarchies, like the reason as to why these kings or these monarchs were becoming successful, can be attributed to the social changes, right? But social changes which had taken place in the 12th and 13th centuries. Because of those social changes, now the political system is reaping benefits, right? So what actually happened in the 12th and 13th centuries, which is what we call as the social changes, right? For example, the first point is the dissolution of the feudal system of lordship and vassalage, right? So basically the feudal system, the destruction of the feudal system, right? There's no more lord vassal relationship, right? That has been becoming much weaker and weaker. And then there's slow rate of economic growth, right? So because of the slow rate of economic growth, it gives the first opportunity to the kings to increase their control over their powerful and not so powerful subjects. Now, because lords are not there in between, yeah, we don't need lords right now, because the feudal system is becoming much weaker and weaker. Therefore, kings have the opportunity to exert their power directly on his subjects. He doesn't need the lord as the intermediary here, right? So direct power relations. And also, like, rulers dispensed with the system of feudal levies for their armies, right? And introduced professionally trained infantry. The same point again, they're not relying on the lords for armies, yeah, but in fact they have their own military under them, like under their direct control, who are professionally trained, right? These are not like amateurs. These are not like peasants come soldiers. No, these are like purely soldiers, purely professionally trained soldiers, right? They often had like guns with them. They had other kinds of artillery, right? Artillery is some kind of war equipment, right? All of them were there with the professionally trained soldiers, which are given by the ruler, yeah. So the resistance of the aristocracies crumbled in the face of the firepower of the kings. See, to a certain extent, the lords are powerful, right? The aristocracies, noblemen, basically the second order is powerful because they have a lot of resources and power, yeah. But when they are trying to face the king himself, right? King is much more powerful than the aristocracy, right? And obviously, if there is some kind of battle or conflict going on between the king and the aristocrats, obviously the king is bound to win because king has even more resources, right? So in the face off between aristocracies and kings, kings always won, yeah. So that's the point the textbook is making. And nextly, by increasing the taxes, yeah, like 15th century, 15th, 16th centuries, the situation was better. There were no more famines or like agricultural productivity was booming a little bit, right? So because of that, monarchs started levying taxes again on the peasants and other kinds of laborers, right? Now there's a lot of revenue generation for the state, and because of that revenue, now the state is paying that revenue as some kind of salary to the soldiers, right? That revenue can support the larger armies now. You can recruit so many more soldiers so that your what do you say, your number of soldiers will increase, right? If there are more soldiers, you can obviously extend your boundaries to a certain limit, right? Like push your boundaries even further, conquer the neighboring states and all that stuff, right? And if there are any some kinds of internal revolts are also happening, all of these armies will stand as one and revolt against the internal rebellions, right? So basically nobody can challenge the royal authority. Yeah. So centralization, however, did not occur without resistance from the aristocracy. So like all of this power and all, kings did not get them very easily because there is a lot of resistance coming from so many actors. One of them is aristocracy, the noble people, the second order, right? They did not allow for so much power to be vested in the hands of the king, but nonetheless, king emerged victorious because he's the king. Yeah. Okay. Any questions till here, guys? Okay, I don't see any questions. Okay, I'll move on then. So, whatever the opposition that the king was facing, right? Like, because people are stopping him from becoming so centralized, right? Whatever the opposition that the king was facing, there is a common thread running through all of these types of oppositions, and that was the question of taxation, right? So what is the problem with taxation again? For example, in England, rebellions occurred and were put down in all of these years, right? 1497, 1536, 47, 49 and 53. There are so many rebellions happening to stop the authority of the king, right? In the same manner in France as well, for example, Louis XI, the king we've discussed in the last slide, yeah, he's also had to put so much effort into crushing the revolts of the dukes and the princes, right? So lesser nobles, like other members of the local assemblies, all of these certain categories of people, they resisted the royal power, right? They don't want the king to become very, very powerful, because in that case, their powers will be decreased, right? Because in one manner, king is basically snatching all of these powers from the lords. That is why lords are concerned. Yeah. So these were some of the kinds of opposition to the king. Okay. Okay, thanks Aishi for responding. No doubts. Cool. Yeah, the religious wars in France, right? In the 16th century, again, this whole another episode, we'll talk about them in the further classes, right? So basically, there are so many religious wars that were happening in France in the 16th century, right? Again, those were also in some sense opposing the authority of the king. Yeah, the nobility managed a tactical shift. They're adopting all these strategies, all these tactics to somehow reduce the power of the king, but they were not successful enough. Yeah. And from being opponents to the new regimes, they quickly transformed themselves into loyalists. Again, like what a quick shift here, right? Till a certain point of time, they have been trying so hard to, like from stopping the king to become so powerful, and all of a sudden they realized that they are failing in whatever strategies they're adopting. Yeah, so they've thought about it, and then finally they have come to a conclusion that it's good for us if we stay on the side of the king, right? Like on the same side, same party. So instead of revolting against the king, let's just stay loyal to the king. So just look at this reversal here, right? From being opponents, they have become loyal people to the king, right? So now remember this point as like the demarcating factor, because there's a whole shift of paradigm happening here, right? The lords are becoming the supporters of the king now. So because of this, what happened, right? It is for this reason that royal absolutism has become called a modified form of feudalism. Read this statement twice, thrice, 4 times and 5 times also if you don't understand it. But this is absolutely important, right? What does this basically mean? Till now we're telling that there is royal absolutism offered by the kings, right? They're very royal in nature, they're very, very absolutist, right? Like a complete monarchical form. But once these lords have shifted and became loyal to the king, don't you think they are trying to establish another modified form of feudalism? This time the feudalism is not between peasants and lords, but now the feudalism is between the lords and the kings, right? Just imagine, the sole basis of feudalism is loyalty, right? That same loyalty is being shown by the lords towards the kings now, right? So definitely historians want to call this as some modified form of feudalism, right? So yeah, I wanted to stress on this point enough so that you all will understand. But if you don't understand this concept anywhere, please just let me know, because it's really, really important, right? Anyways, precisely the same class of people who had been rulers in the feudal system, yeah, the lords, continue to dominate the political scene. The system is changed, but that doesn't mean the lords have lost their power. They still have their power, and they continue to dominate the political sphere in the society, right? And how were they doing it? Because they have all these important positions in the courts, they have all these great administrative positions in the kingdom, right? And that's how they are trying to exert their power. The power is there, but the way that they are manifesting is different, right? Before they used to do it with the land and like the tenantship, exploiting the labor, collecting the revenue and all that stuff. Now they are doing it from their position as great administrative servants in the kingdom, right? So the positions are different, but the power is the same. But the new regimes were different in some important ways, right? What are they? The king was no longer at the apex of a pyramid where loyalty had been a matter of personal dependence and trust. Yeah, so he's not just the king for namesake, right? He has so much responsibility vested in him. Yeah, it's no more a trust relationship and all that stuff, but in fact he is at the center of an elaborate courtier society. What is a courtier society? Again, there's a court. It's not just the king who sits in the court. There are n number of ministers helping him, right? Be it the finance minister, be it the treasurer, be it the, I don't know, like judicial officer, lawyers, like so many other administrative officials who are sitting in the court to assist the king, right? So he's the center or the head of all of these relations as well. So he has to maintain this network of patron-client relationship. Yeah, so his duties have increased. The king's duties have increased. That is some kind of change that was happening in the political sphere. Yeah, so all the monarchies, like all the rulers and empires, irrespective of whether they are weak or powerful, they needed the cooperation of those who could command authority. Right, like obviously without no cooperation between different elements, it wouldn't be a success, right? So that the element of cooperation is very, very important to exert authority. And how is that ensured? How is cooperation ensured? It is ensured by the means of patronage, right? Patronage, again, you all know, it's like favoring somebody, right? So therefore money became an important way in which non-aristocratic elements like merchants and bankers could gain access to the court. Again, what is this patronage, right? So here we have an example. Firstly, like for example, if you look at all of these merchants and bankers, these are not a part of the feudal system, right? They are not aristocrats. They don't work in the court, right? But there are some professional people in the kingdom. Yeah. So if these bankers or merchants, yeah, in order for them to access the court, right? Dude, honestly speaking, king was always in need of money, right? Because he has to carry out so many welfare activities. At the same time, he has to give salaries to so many people. So always money was an important thing which was needed by the king. There is treasury for him. There are so many gold reserves, cash, wealth and all that stuff. But there was no liquid cash, right? So for that manner, merchants and bankers often used to help the king by giving him the money, right? And the king in turn has to do some kind of favor, right? Like just for casually, merchants and bankers will not give the money to the king, even though he's the king. King needs to do something which benefits the merchants and bankers. And in this case, he basically patronized the merchants and bankers, right? Again, these can be in different forms. Let's say giving them tax exemptions, like don't pay me tax and all that stuff. Yeah, some kind of benefits. So that kind of relationship between like people and the kings was very, very important, which we basically are calling as the patron-client relationship. Yeah, so I'm hoping that point is clear. Yeah, right, like they lent money to the kings, the same point I was mentioning right now. They used it for different purposes and majorly for paying the wages of the soldiers, right? So this is why, because these merchants and bankers are non-feudal people, by incorporating them into the system, the non-feudal elements are also being incorporated into the state system. Yeah, so that's the gist we have for that slide. So I think this is the last slide we have. Just bear with me for a couple of minutes. I'll quickly wind this up. So the later history of France and England was to be shaped by these changes in the power structures, right? If you basically look at the 17th, 18th centuries, England and France, right? Because of all these political changes that were happening in the 16th, 15th centuries, yeah, they have shaped the future France and future England to a greater extent, right? For example, in the reign of the Louis XIII of France, right? So in 1614, what happened is a meeting was held of the French Consultative Assembly, right? At that point of time, it's known as the Estates General, which basically had 3 houses, right? Each representing the clergy, nobility and the rest, like the order of the privilege, right? So their meeting was held in the year 1614. But according to the rules and the norms, every year these meetings are supposed to be held, right? Just like the budget sessions we have for today's parliament, right? In the same manner, every year these meetings are supposed to be conducted. But in France, this particular meeting was not conducted till 1789. Just imagine the number of years in between. Almost like 160, 170 years, right? For so many years, the meetings did not happen because the king did not want to share his powers with the other 3 orders. The greediness of the king, right? Like the king wants everything to himself, like he's greedy for power. So because he don't want to share his powers, he cancelled these meetings. He did not conduct these meetings at all, right? This is the situation that was happening in France. But on the other side, if you look at England, the situation was much, much different, right? even before the Norman conquest. So we're talking about like the 10th, 9th centuries right now. Norman conquest happened back then, right? So even before Norman conquest happened, the Anglo-Saxons had a great council which the king had to consult before imposing any tax. The situation in England is totally different from France, right? Because in order for the king to implement anything, he can't take his own decisions. He definitely has to share his power with the council, who consisted of the clergy and nobility, right? He has to consult them, and only if the clergy and nobility allows or like permits that bill to be passed, only then the king can implement all of these new measures, right? So the situation in England is totally different. And this in itself developed into what was called the parliament in the later times, right? Even in the 21st century, the same system is existing in Europe, in England, right? We still have the parliament, we still have the House of Lords, which is basically the house where the lords are there, like nobility and clergymen. We also have other house, which is called the House of Commons, right? Which represents like the towns and rural areas, right? Just like the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha we have in India, in England we have the House of Lords and House of Commons. That's called the parliamentary system there. That emerged in the 16th century and that is still in existence in the 21st century as well, right? So that's what we mean by the future centuries being shaped by the actions that took place in the medieval Europe, right? So, but there was one king by name Charles who ruled for almost 11 years, 1629 to 1640 in England, right? He was greedy for power. For some reason, he didn't want to conduct the parliament because obviously he didn't want to share his power. So for 11 years straight, he did not conduct any parliamentary sessions, and obviously people were protesting against it. Like all the nobility and clergymen were like, no, we need the meetings, we need the parliament. He was forced to conduct a meeting, yeah, and at some point of time he's also running out of money, so therefore definitely he needs help of the nobility and clergymen. And that is when towards the end of his reign, I think in the last year of his reign, King Charles forcibly conducts a meeting, like conducts a parliament, right? Because he needs money. He doesn't have money. Just for his own greediness, because he needs money, he's conducting the parliament. But why will the nobility and clergy stay quiet? They're also angry, right? Like they're also pissed off. They're like, no, we're not going to help you. In fact, we're going to wage a war against you, right? Because you're not being an ethical monarch. You're doing everything according to your own terms, which is not how the society should work, right? So they've complained about the king and therefore they did not cooperate with the king and finally like killed him also, yeah. So now because of the monarchical form of system, instead of the monarchical form, England newly sees a republican form of system, right? So these are all like different political forms we have, right? Like republic, democracy, monarchy, aristocracy and all that stuff. So now in England, the republican form of system replaced the monarchy, right? But however, this republic did not last long, yeah. Soon enough the monarchy was restored, right? But there is one condition now, that the parliament sessions should be conducted very regularly, like once in a year. Nobody should postpone it nor nobody should cancel it. They should definitely be conducted, right? That's the condition on which the monarchy was restored. So that's the England scene, right? So because of these factors that happened in the 16th, 17th centuries, even in today France, if you see, we have a republican form of government. Like in the 21st century, we have a republican form of government in France. But if you look at England, we still have a monarchy. Agreed that there's a prime minister for England, right? But we also have a monarch, right? In fact, all of the issues are like all of the orders are being issued in the name of the monarch, right? The queen. So in some sense, England is still a monarchy, even in the 21st century, right? So this is because of the different directions that the histories of these two countries took after the 17th century. That's the point of divergence here, right? Like even though they had the same past, even though they are part of the same geographical area, like France and England, they're like just adjacent to each other, like this, just surrounding each other, right? Same geographical region, same cultural background, same historical background. But despite all this, because of the changes that took place in the 17th century, yeah, they had to like diverge paths, right? And that is why one ended up as the republican form and one ended up as a monarchy in the 21st century, right? Okay, cool. Finally, we've come to the end of the chapter. Okay, I think this is also like the last chapter for term 1, which basically means we've officially done the term 1 syllabus as well. So, cool. We're done. Any questions, guys? Also, like, just to give you a heads up, in tomorrow, not tomorrow, sorry, on Tuesday's class, which is at 6 p.m. in the evening, we'll be having a quiz on this chapter, right? It's a mentee quiz. So just inform your friends if anybody has missed out today's session, like just inform them saying that we have a quiz on Tuesday so that we can have like a competitive quiz, right? I'm hoping everybody will tune in exactly at 6 p.m. on a Tuesday for a quiz on this chapter, right? So yeah, any questions, just put them down in the chat box. Just type them down. In the meanwhile, I'll try to wind this session up because we're already like past time by 12 minutes. Okay, regarding the Unacademy's Plus and Iconic subscriptions I was talking about in the beginning of the class today, yeah, there is an offer going on right now which is valid till tomorrow, 25th of October, Monday. If you use the code which is TUM10, you'll obviously get a 10% off straight away on the subscriptions. But if you do it before tomorrow, which is a limited offer, you can actually get an additional 10% off. So that's the advantage. It's a limited offer. Go grab yours before this ends. And yeah, thanks so much guys for tuning in. Thank you so much. Also, like, if you like the content of these videos, please do like it, share it as much as possible, and also do subscribe to the channel Unacademy and Scholars in particular, right? Thanks guys. Thanks so much for tuning. I'll see you guys again on Tuesday, 6 p.m. for a quiz. Yeah, cool. So the session is officially over. Y'all can leave, but if you have any questions, just stay back and ask them, because after this we are not having a revision session. We're directly having a quiz, right? So in case of any questions, just stay back and ask. But if there are none, y'all are free to leave. Yeah, thanks anyways, and it's weekend, so have a fun weekend, but stay safe. Yeah, I'll see you in 2 days. Bye people. I'll just hang on for a couple of seconds in case anybody has questions. But yeah, if there are none, then we can close. Okay, I don't see any, so I'll take that as everything's clear. Chalo then, cool. I'll close this up. Have a safe weekend, guys. Have a good day tomorrow as well. I'll see you on Tuesday for 6 p.m. for the quiz. Just remember and tune in. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you so much. And